Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Engel and I'm a college freshman at Maricosta College in Oceanside, California. Before I get into my presentation, I would just like to say a huge thank you to my English professor, Shelley Homer, for really helping me with this project and for even allowing me to do an honors project in the first place. Thank you so much. So this is my project, Minority and Low Income Communities, the Perfect Scapegoats. And this is an English presentation, so you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with English? I will tell you. So I have learned since like 7th grade, a common theme is that the propaganda that we learn about is almost always about underrepresented groups in our society, like minority groups or low income communities. In my project, I'm gonna discuss why propaganda is successful in creating mass hostility toward marginalized groups of people and how the propagandists deliberately choose to exploit them as scapegoats for their society's problems. I find that these marginalized groups are usually targeted when their country experiences some form of economic obstacle. The marginalization of these groups can derive from existing economic turmoil or fear that economic turmoil is imminent. Detecting the use of propaganda is a whole lot easier to do when looking back on history than experiencing it in the present. The use of propaganda from movements such as the Nazi Party and the American Know-Nothing Party are widely condemned for igniting discrimination and aggression toward minority communities. The three main marginalized groups that will be analyzed in this project are Irish American immigrants of the 19th century, the Jewish community in the 20th century, and Latin American immigrants in the 21st century. Although the marginalization of these three groups derive all from three different centuries and a lot of different contexts, they all share astounding commonalities in their negative portrayals in propaganda cartoons and in their treatment in society. This project also discusses how name-calling, transfer, and violations of logical fallacies work and how it affects society's outlook on the targeted group. This cartoon is titled "The Balance of Trade with Great Britain Seems to Still Be Against Us" and is illustrated by William A. Rogers in 1883. This poorhouse represents the famished and poor Irish American immigrants during the 19th century migrating to America. By portraying the Irish American immigrants as a faceless object, a poorhouse, the author of this cartoon depicts the Irish American immigrant population as one, rather than individual human beings. The technique of this propaganda used in the cartoon is known as the transfer technique, as it associates Irish American immigrants as a whole to a poorhouse. The transfer propaganda technique is used to put two unrelated ideas together in order to besiege a negative image of the targeted group. The author wants his audience to perceive the entire population as one horrendous influx of people. This perception allows the audience to antagonize an entire demographic of people as though they are lesser human beings. After the Civil War, Americans were already on edge that job opportunities would be taken away by the newly freed African American population from the South. Leading up to 1883, America had not endured such a large migration of people all at one time. Americans hated the idea that newcomers, especially ones that were Catholic, could potentially steal jobs and welfare. These newcomers, compacted with the recently freed African Americans, angered the low-income white communities as they already struggled to find work. Thus, the Nativist Party called the Know-Nothings was formed. Much of the propaganda against immigrants during this time was a product of the Know-Nothing Party's ideas. The Smithsonian's magazine article titled "How the 19th Century Know-Nothing Party Reshaped American Politics" by Lorraine Bossanel explains that party members supported the deportation of foreign beggars and criminals, a 21-year naturalization period for immigrants, mandatory Bible reading in schools, and the elimination of all Catholics from public office. They wanted to restore their vision of what America should look like with temperance, Protestantism, self-reliance, and with American nationality and work ethic enshrined as the nation's highest values. By cracking down on immigration laws, the Know-Nothing Party established itself as nativists who want to exclude new immigrants from the political sphere of America. The title of this cartoon, "The Balance of Trade with Great Britain Seems to Still Be Against Us," furthers the idea that these immigrants were invaluable to American society. By referring to the Irish American immigrants as trade rather than human beings, the artist of this cartoon makes their lives seem disposable and futile, like trade goods. As a result of the propaganda against the Irish Americans, many of them remained jobless in their new country as companies blocked their employment by putting up "Irish need not apply" signs. The Irish American immigrants were the perfect scapegoat for 19th century America to blame its rigid job market because they lacked power and representation in the American government in order to defend themselves. The Know Nothing Party deliberately campaigned for zero immigrant representation in government because they did not want their pecking order in American society to be meddled with. This anti-Semitic poster comes from German-occupied Poland in 1941. The poster's text can be translated into English as, "Jews are lice, they cause typhus." The authors of this poster want to belittle and dehumanize the entire Jewish population as much as possible, so they symbolize Jewish people as vile vermin. In doing so, people think of Jewish folk as subhumans. This technique of propaganda is known as name-calling, as it redirects the audience's attention from the targeted subject's true identity to an inferior image. This poster was created in order to divide the German population from the lice. In doing so, it is easier for the audience to perceive Jewish people as if they deserve unequal treatment and rights. The phrase next to the skull is translated into English as lice Jews. This phrase further reiterates the name-calling strategy and further associates the Jewish community with the subhuman correlation. As Jewish people are supposed to represent the lice in this cartoon, one could assume that the dismembered skull represents German society. By depicting German society in this way, they appear to be victimized by the lice's inhumanity and cruelty. Representing these two paraded groups in this fashion intercedes the notion that the Jewish people are villains and Germans are the ones suffering from the Jewish people's very existence. Building up to 1941, Germany had already faced harsh economic hardship. The Nazi Party ran on the idea that all Jews and non-Aryan people were to blame for Germany's recent increase in inflation and unemployment rates. According to British Library's article titled "Voices of the Holocaust," the Nazi Party wanted to portray the Jews as subhuman, inferior beings who were interested primarily in their own economic gain and communism. The Nazis built upon the negative myths of the Jewish race, which had existed for centuries. The Nazi Party saw the Jewish communities as an easy target as they exploited the already historical prejudices towards them. Voices of the Holocaust further explains that. During the early 1930s, at the time the Nazi rise to power, Germany was experiencing great economic and social hardship. The country had to pay enormous compensation to the Allies as a result of losing World War I, had to adhere to the Treaty of Versailles, whereby they could no longer have a large army and they had to give up land, and they also experienced the inflation and high unemployment rates. The German people were struggling to determine how to piece back together their country. When a once successful country turns into economic turmoil, citizens almost always look for someone to save the day, like a hero, and someone to blame, like a villain. In post-World War I Germany's case, the Nazi Party provided the country with an answer. Unfortunately, this plan included placing all of the blame on the Jewish community. Through posters like the one shown before, the Nazi Party was successful in producing mass hostility towards Jewish people. By creating an us versus them mentality in Germany, Jewish people were seen as the economic scoundrels who must be exterminated like lice in order for their country to prosper again. The Jewish community was the perfect scapegoat for the Nazi Party to blame Germany's declining economy because they were a minority of their population. They already had pre-existing prejudices towards them, and few were represented in government. Before massacring millions of Jewish people and other minorities, the Nazi Party stripped Jewish people of their businesses and vantage points into society. The use of propaganda helped the rationalization of the Holocaust genocide, which murdered around 6 million people of Jewish descent. I was really hesitant about putting an example from the 21st century because I really wanted to stray away from being political, but just keep in mind I'm really trying to analyze this meme from like a propaganda English standpoint, so just bear that in mind. I'm truly not trying to be political. English, yes. Okay, so political cartoons have now evolved into the present day meme, like the one pictured here, and these are often found circulating on social media services such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This meme, in particular, utilizes two different techniques of propaganda, name-calling and the violation of a logical fallacy. Referring to undocumented immigrants as illegal aliens dehumanizes these human beings' identities into foreign adversaries who are just not welcome in our country. To call a human being illegal perpetuates the idea that a person's existence and livelihood is against the law. Naming someone illegal implies that they are inherently a criminal to society. Alien, similar to the Nazis' depiction of Jewish people as lice, furthers the idea that the targets are subhuman and undeserving of equal human rights. Calling these immigrants an unhuman name is not only politically incorrect and offensive, but it also curtails the immigrants' true identities. A logical fallacy can be defined as invalid reasoning behind the point that someone is trying to make. In this meme creator's case, they purposely use a faulty analogy in order to convey his conjunction between undocumented immigrants and drug dealers by making this presumption that these groups are alike in more than one manner. The phrase unlicensed pharmacist is senseless, while the phrase undocumented immigrants is etymologically the correct way to address people who do not have citizenship papers. The meme follows bad logic as it makes the comparison and analogy between undocumented immigrants and drug dealers. This comparison perpetuates President Trump's idea that all immigrants from Latin America are rapists, drug dealers, and murderers. Contrasting the phrase undocumented immigrants to the phrase unlicensed pharmacists deliberately manipulates the reader into believing that there is a connection between the two. No matter the place that a person lies on the political spectrum, it is so imperative to recognize that the use of propaganda still exists. History shows that mass production of propaganda always leads to discrimination and aggression towards a group of people. Latin American undocumented immigrants are the perfect scapegoat to blame high taxes and high crime rates on for many reasons. First of all, undocumented immigrants from Latin America are a vulnerable group of colored people with already limited legal rights. Due to decades of insulting and fictitious depictions of Latin Americans and other people of color in the media, Latin American undocumented immigrants already have stark prejudices in America against them. Placing the villain identity on undocumented immigrants entices society to follow the lead of people who believe that in order to make their lives better if they can eradicate this problem. People of Latin American descent and people of color in general have historically lacked adequate representation in government, making them assailable to mistreatment in society without real repercussions. The purpose of this project was to analyze how political cartoons and memes use propaganda techniques to manipulate specific reactions towards people belonging to a specific group in our society. Furthermore, this project also expounds upon why minority and low-income communities are the ones most vulnerable to society's perpetual habit to find a villain to place blame on. I hope you've recognized that there really is a pattern of villainization of specific groups in society that concurs with the imminence of economic turmoil. It is so imperative that people stop and question the underlying messages and the author's intentions in cartoons and memes that portray underrepresented minorities and low-income communities in an adverse way. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you so much for your time.